Chris, you stayed at Friar Park famously when George first moved in, and the place was virtually, derelict and freezing cold. Did you did you ever go back and finally see it in this incredible palatial condition that he'd finally managed to rehabilitate it into? Because it took years to do that, didn't it? Really, to
It really
transform it.
did. Well, when I moved there, all the lakes were still covered.
Hmm.
The nuns had been there, and they had the kids during Second World War come out as a place to be during the bombing. So they covered up all of the lakes. They covered up anything that would have gotten the kids. The kids could have gotten into trouble, and painted over all of the cherubs who didn't. They painted diapers on all the cherubs that were around the walls and everything. So he had to start redoing it with the help of people in the town who had been there and knew it. And that's what he spent the first year at least doing all of that, and the lakes, getting the lakes back. When I was there, yes, I used to go back because I go and stay. I spent Christmas with them, and I went back before George's tour and hung out with him for a while. So I would go back to Friar Park, and I went back even after that when Danny was born, because I brought him a little remote car, and he loved it. So I did go. I had been back to Friar Park, and I'm sure it's even more amazing now.
Mm.
But because I don't think it ever stops changing. But
do you think that one day? Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Do you think that one day Danny will finally open the doors and let everybody have a look and have a kind of open pass for fans and tourists? National Trust, maybe?
Who knows? I mean, it's a very big house to be homey. It's like, it was kind of spooky when we first moved in there. It was a little scary. Plus, they kept saying there were ghosts. So, it was a little spooky. But the last time I was there, when it was more homey and when they had really fixed it up more like a home, it felt better. But it's still such a big house. Patty and I used to try to count the rooms, and we would get to a certain point, and we'd just give up because we'd get lost. So, but I hope it is open, because it's a beautiful place. It's just beautiful.
Were you ever present at any recording sessions at Friar Park?
Not that I immediately comes to mind. I mean, I've been there since he had the studio, but I don't remember necessarily being there when he was recording. He probably was. Who knew?
What was the studio like? What sort of space was it?
Well, let me see. They had taken a few rooms apart and made it. It was huge, as I recall. It was like really big. Yeah.
Must have been hard to heat the place. I always imagine it being this incredibly drafty place. You could sort of heat the main room, but then if you wanted to go upstairs to the toilet or take a shower somewhere, it must have been terrible trying to warm the place up.
Yeah, when we moved in, there were gas heaters in every room, but they did get central heating in.
I bet they did.
Yeah, it was much warmer. Like the last time I was there, I didn't feel cold.
Must have been a huge shock coming from Arizona to the British freezing winter. And poor heating and poor plumbing.
Yeah, but you know what? There's a point where it was like when I would go over to stay with them, that's what I expected. And so I didn't really, it was okay. It was so great being there and hanging out and everything that I didn't think about that too much. And the place got so comfortable, when they got beds. It was so much more comfortable.
And George would head out to the pub sometimes in Henley.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever do that with him? Did you ever go out to the pub in Henley and watch the heads turn as he came in?
Yeah, we would go down to a pub. Not a lot, but and perhaps he went a lot more later once he'd been there for so long. But we would go down, and of course, people all knew he lived there, but they kind of left him alone. And I think that happens when you move When someone like that moves into an area where they know you, they know you're there, and they know you want your privacy, they become quite respectful.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, can we take you to the Rolling Thunder Revue now and that wonderful tour which you were on? I guess you're going to say you were backstage drinking or something and not watching the shows, but were any memories of that tour?
Well, of course I do. I mean, first of all, it was really lucky that that I met Bob through George, because that immediately kind of set up a little trust where Bob can be, a little wary, a little wary of. So I had his trust, and that helped. And it was actually probably one of I was very tired. I had done a Santana, Earth, Wind and Fire tour in Europe, and I flew directly from Paris to New York as that tour ended to do this one. So I didn't have my usual month or so off, which is what it takes to kind of get yourself back. So I was very tired during his tour, but it was fun because, nobody knew except for maybe a handful of us where we were going. They weren't announcing the whole itinerary. So even if guys bring their girlfriends out, they'd have to come and say, where are we going to be next Thursday? And so it had that feeling of mystery. It was a magical mystery tour, actually. It really was.
And Bob, was he driving the bus, wasn't he?
Well, he drove in a camper. He drove a camper, and the band and some of us rode in a bus that had a proper driver. But he would drive the camper around a lot. And, it was good fun. The band was great. New people kept coming on all the time, on and off. The shows were amazing. And then, he would go in whiteface, and then pretty soon everybody else was wearing whiteface. It was just like there were these sort of evolutions as the tour kept going on. But he was very good to work for. I enjoyed working for him. And, he was Bob. He was Bob. Actually, I was with Linda Ronstadt this weekend, and she said, what's he like? She'd never met him. And I said, he's just like he is. I mean, sometimes he was so friendly and we'd talk, and then the next time he'd look right through you as though he'd never seen you in his life. And you just kind of got used to that's how he was. Everybody knew it.
I mean, it's one of the most creative kind of performances of all time in pop music. Did you think when you were kind of hired that he was maybe kind of committing suicide by progressing that?
Who, Bob?
Yeah, with the whole idea of the tour and where they were playing and the audience sizes. It was completely crazy. Was he doing it for profile, to be remembered for having cut through and done things in a different way? What do you feel?
Well, I can only theorize on that, but my feeling was that this is something he wanted to do. It was like a circus. It was, that's what it felt like. It was like a circus. And I think Bob likes that idea. Now, later he would say that he didn't look back on it fondly, but I think it was kind of fun having different musicians come in and going to different places. And they would do these side trips all the time, to go to Jack Kerouac's gravesite,
Exactly.
or to go to the prison that they did in New Jersey for Hurricane Carter. So there were all these little side trips and these kind of dramas, and they were filming a movie also, Ronaldo and Clara. So they had a film crew as well. And of course, they never really focused on the film, but it was a lot going on. Let me put it that way. I was pretty darn tired by the end of it.
I mean, it produced some of the greatest Dylan performances of all time.
I thought I did watch a lot of, I always went out for One More Cup of Coffee, Sarah, and one other one. Those I didn't miss. Every night I went out for those. But there were times when I just go sit in the audience and watch the whole show because it was never the same.
Yeah.
It would change somehow.
Yeah.
It was
and
very.
were you sorry. I was going to ask, were you at the 76 leg of the tour as well when he did Fort Collins, Colorado, and he did that superb version of Shelter from the Storm.
Well, I guess I was. You know, I had told them that I wouldn't go out on the second half because I needed a raise, and they were only paying me $500 a week. And I said, I need $750 a week. And Barry Imhoff said, well, no, you're not going to get it. And I said, then I'm not coming. And so after about, well, I don't know how long after the tour started, Barry called me and said, we need you to come out. I said, do I get $750? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. So I flew out and picked them up in Texas. And I think we went from there up to Fort Collins. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Brilliant performances.
Yeah, it was the second tour didn't have the same feel to it. It was sad.
No, sure.
Yeah, you just couldn't.
Some shocking reviews at the time of Hard Rain. Everyone slagged it off. I think it's a wonderful album. I mean, it's not all brilliant, but when he does Idiot Wind, and apparently Sarah was in the front row when he was singing Idiot Wind to her.
Wow.
According to Clinton Halen, anyway.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the thing about Bob is that I believe to be true is that he likes the unexpected anyway. I mean, he's ready for that. You know, I think what people, and I get why people want everything to sound just the same, but that's not what creative people do. You know, they create, and they don't want to sing the same song every night the same way. So, you know, but unfortunately, audiences don't get that.
I think musicians riff off the unexpected.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
Chris, I don't know if you've heard it, but today a wonderful expanded Budokan has been released on Spotify. So the original 78 concert, the entire set list from February the 28th and March the 1st, loads of bonus tracks. It's not the best in the world, but it's worth checking out.
Boy, there's a lot going on right now, isn't there?
Yes.
You know? Whoa. Well,
what are your thoughts on Now and Then?
Now and Then, I didn't like it when I first heard it. I just thought, God, where did it go? There's nothing there. But I have to admit, I heard it on the radio finally, in my car, and then I really liked it. It was sitting in front of the TV looking at the video or, you know, things like that. And then I actually really appreciated it. But it's Paul. I mean, that's what it is. It's Paul doing what Paul does, which is like, okay, we've got to keep this history going on and we're going to do what we can. The video, I almost cried during the video watching it because it really does show you that that's what it was and this is what it is. But I wasn't crazy about all of the video either. I didn't like John jumping all over the place. I thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
It's interesting that George had said, you know, famously that he didn't think that song was worthy of release. You know, they'd done Free as a Bird and Real Love. I think even Real Love he wasn't maybe 100% keen on, but that went through. But he didn't seem to want to do Now and Then. What do you make of that? Do you think it's okay that they went ahead and did it despite those misgivings? Because George is no longer here to nix it.
I think if George had been here, he wouldn't have gone for it. That's my own personal thought. But he's not. So, I mean, as far as I could tell, Paul even replaced some of his guitar work, right, on it.
He did the slide guitar part, but George hadn't got around to doing that himself at the time.
Oh, he hadn't put it on yet.
No.
Well, there's a lot of those. There are so many rumors out about this record. It's unbelievable. But my son, who's 37, loves it. Said, Mom, I think this is what they would have done if they were all alive. This is what they would have done today, because he finds it's appealing. It's got some more young people feel to it. There are things that Paul did that appeal to the younger music fans. So that was his take on it. I can't hear it, but there you go.
Chris, having known, Sorry, Chris. Having known and worked with both the Beatles and the Stones at close quarters, What would you regard as the main differences between the two groups?
Oh, God. Well, the Beatles seemed very, everything was so organized, and it was very easy to be around them and to get to them. And the Stones were, I mean, I was working in the 60s and 70s, so we have to take that into consideration. But there was just a lot more chaos involved with the Stones and drugs. There were a lot more drugs. We didn't have that many. In the 70s, there were a lot more drugs anyway. But, you know, I think I've said that I've been called a Beatle person. And that was really it. I was more of a Beatle fan than I was a Stones fan. Or a Dylan fan, for that matter.
And that was driven by the music or by the personalities or a combination of both?
The music originally, before I knew them. And then once I knew them, I mean, I loved Mick and Keith. Keith's one of the nicest guys. And Bill Wyman, Charlie, I mean, they're really neat guys. I really liked them, and I loved working for them and being on tour with them. But it's just a different type of behavior. And it almost felt like the Beatles were more mature. They were older. I don't know how else to say it.
And how different did the Beatles behave when there were four of them together as opposed to you being alone with one or two of them at the same time?
Well,
did that whole group dynamic affect their behavior in any way?
With the Beatles? I think they usually related to each other more than other people around them. So if you were around them, you know, like at a party, you tend to see them interacting. They interacted with each other more at that period of time. But there weren't a lot of other people around back then because Brian had closed the gates and they hadn't quite opened at that point. If that makes sense.
Perfect sense.
So, Chris, going back to the famous Miss O'Dell song, do we know why George started laughing in the middle of the lyric?
Well, if you listen to the lyric, the one that kicks him off is he said, the rice rolling up to my front door. I think he realized and that's not the lyric. I don't even remember what it is. But when he said that, I think he caught it and he just started laughing because the idea of rice rolling up to his front door. I don't know where. Oh, I see. We're going to get it now.
You might recognize the handwriting.
Yeah, I do. Where did you get that? It was that
this
in
is
the
from
book?
his I Me Mine book. Yeah.
Me Mine, right. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty interesting. Well, you do realize the majority of it is really about Bangladesh and other people. But when asked how I feel about it, I always say I think it was the most romantic song ever written.
It is a nice song because he's so off guard, isn't he? It's that period when I suppose he was doing quite serious work in a way. You know, the material he was doing had a certain gravitas to it, but that track seems to show another side to him.
Well, I think that what he told me is that Capitol wanted him to release it as the A side originally because they thought it made him appear more human, and because he'd done all of the spiritual stuff, and thank God he didn't. Truthfully.
Did you ever hang out with the Wilburys in later years when George had got involved with that? Did you ever have lunch with the Wilburys or
not particularly. But I had dinner one night with George, Tom, and
Jeff Lynne.
Jeff Lynne, right. But I had told George about Jeff Lynne because I toured with ELO in Europe when I lived in Germany. I worked with my friend who was a promoter, and they were one of the groups that came over, and I traveled with them. And when after that tour, I went back to England to Friar Park and stayed with George and Olivia. And I told George then, I said, oh my God, ELO is amazing. Jeff Lynne is one of the most amazing people. And I said, I just can't believe how many hits. And so I was raving about it. He didn't know Jeff at that time. And after he met Jeff, he did say to me, you're the one who turned me on to him. So I knew Jeff in a different way. And Tom Petty I knew much earlier because he was signed to Shelter Records, which was Leon Russell and Denny Cordell's record company. And I was with Leon when they signed him. So I knew Tom when he just first came to LA. And I heard him and I thought, oh my God, he sounds like Dylan and Roger McGuinn. And so I introduced him to Roger McGuinn because he adored Roger McGuinn. So I didn't know Roy Orbison. I think he's the only one I didn't know. The others I all had either toured with or knew.
So which ELO?
Which was the ELO tour that you did?
Yeah, I was going to ask which album did you introduce George to? Was it Face the Music or?
I don't think I didn't introduce him to an album. I just introduced him to the idea of ELO and Jeff Lynne because I thought they were great. I toured with them in the early 80s in Germany. So I don't know what that was. I don't remember the album. I wasn't into them until the first concert. And then I went, oh my God, it's one hit after the other.
That would have been the Time tour where they had the robot on stage. Probably.
Really? I don't know.
Surely George must have been aware of ELO in the 70s, no? You know,
He may have been aware of them, but he didn't know Jeff. He hadn't met him.
Actually, I think ELO did some dates in '86, didn't they? So it might even have been as late as that on their final tour.
By '86, I was back in England, married and had a child.
Oh, right.
So I lived in Germany from about 80 to 84. So it was sometime in that time period.
I think you met up with
Bob
Harris recently.
Bob Harris.
Sorry. Yeah, I think you met up with Bob Harris recently, and I think it might have been Bob who was interviewing John Lennon, where John remarked when asked, as he had always asked, will the Beatles ever reform again or play together again? He said, no need, there's ELO. It's something along those lines. I don't know if it was the interview with Bob or somebody else, but he had a high regard for ELO, or he felt certainly that they were sort of going in a similar direction to what the Beatles would have gone had they gone past 1970.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Sorry,
Chris, you were lucky enough to be on the Fleetwood Mac Tusk tour as well. I mean, the list is endless.
Well, in Europe, I was with them. I did join them on the tour here in the States when I came back, but I did tour with them. In Germany, we brought over a lot of bands. I mean, I worked with Fleetwood Mac, and I knew Mick Fleetwood because he was married to Patty's sister, Jenny Boyd.
Yeah.
So I knew him when I was living at Friar Park. And I worked with Queen, ELO, Genesis, Phil Collins on his own. God, I can't even, Led Zeppelin. I can't even think of all of them.
Tell us about your work with Queen, if you would.
Oh, I love them. You know, it was actually one of the most disturbing moments in my professional career because my boyfriend, who I was the promoter, Mike Scheller, he said, Chris, you get in the limousines and take them to the, I think we were in, not Hamburg, Cologne. Go to the Cologne airport and pick them up with limos. There were like 2 or 3 limos. And I said, okay. Well, when I did stuff like that, I was there way early before the plane arrived. We started driving to the airport and there was a huge traffic jam. And I sat and watched as the time ticked by and I went, oops, plane landed. So by the time I got to the airport with the limos, I walked in the door of the airport and there was sitting all of Queen and some of their crew. And I'm like, hi. I didn't know them. And they just looked, they shot daggers at me. I said, sorry, I was late. It was a traffic jam. So they were not thrilled with me. And I'm like, I've never done this in my whole history. Have I been late for anything? So anyway, but they eventually forgave me. It didn't take very long. And they were just so wonderful to be around and so good on stage. I would go and watch them too, because they were just so good, but just really nice guys. I heard that
Freddie could be quite temperamental off stage. I thought Freddie could have a bit of a temper tantrum once in a while, maybe. Did you ever see any of that?
He may have. I didn't see it, but no, my greatest memory of him, no, he was always really pleasant when I saw him, but my best memory, which I wrote about, is when we were ending the tour in Munich, and we took over a club, and Freddie came up and said, "Do you have any cocaine?" And I said, "Yeah, because I always carried this stuff. You never know, right?" And you'll be happy to know I've been in recovery a long time. But anyway, so the only place we could hide out was a broom closet. And we went into the broom closet, and we did what we were doing. And then I always said, I put Freddie Mercury back in the closet. I don't know how much he would have appreciated it, but I thought it was hysterical.
Was John Deacon as quiet and retiring as his image has always suggested, or did he have his wild side as well?
No, he was very quiet.
Yeah.
He was quiet. I got to know him quite well. I really liked him. I mean, all of them, they all were great guys, but you're right. He was a very quiet guy. And I even flew on a plane once with him years later when I was married. And we didn't say a word to each other. It's like, okay, that's the past. No, I won't go there. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, I'm a huge fan of Badfinger. Richard DeLalo describes them as the heroes of the longest cocktail party. So any memories of Pete Ham and Tommy Evans and the guys from back then?
A lot, actually. I just picked up a book that was written some time ago about Badfinger. I don't know why I decided to read it. And of course, I know what happened to both of them. May Pang was good friends with them, and she would tell me about what was going on. But in reading, I couldn't even read the whole book. I have to be honest. I skipped out a lot of it. So I reread about their depressions and what they went through, and I went, when I knew them, they were these hopeful, happy, ambitious young men, especially, the two of them. And so to think that their career went like that is so sad. And I kind of get it. I mean, their manager, Bill Collins, who was older and loved them and would have done anything for them, had no idea what he was doing. So it was, it was bad management. And then it was really bad management. But it's sad. It's very sad because there was a lot of hope for them.
Yeah, I mean, they never saw a penny. If anyone could have carried the Beatles' mantle into the 70s, it was Badfinger. They were just geniuses.
And yet it seems that was part of the problem, that people didn't know other Beatles then.
Yes. Well, actually, what do you feel about that? And we often talk about that within our group, the fact that the Beatles' popularity sort of waned very quickly in the 70s, and it took a long time for there to be interest in the Beatles again. Like there was a Beatles convention at Alexandra Palace in the mid-70s, and popularly people say that like fewer than 100 people turned up. We had the Red and the Blue albums and so on, but it really took time. Liverpool turned its back on the Beatles, didn't do anything to recognize them. Did you feel that was the case? And did the members of the Beatles sense that in the 70s, that there was Beatles fatigue?
I don't know. I don't know that anybody really sat and thought about it. I think the Beatles had fatigue, their own fatigue. Paul kept going on. He didn't stop. He kept doing things throughout all that time. But John kind of got into it. They just went their separate ways, which was inevitable because they had to. And they were dealing with divorces and, all these different personal things that happen in your 30s, basically. So, I mean, I do remember, was it the anthology that came out that kind of that rebooted everything?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that was because, they still, I still kept in touch with them during all of that time. And they were still doing their own things, but it wasn't the Beatles.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think
Do you ever recall George being a little bit dismissive of what Paul was doing in the 70s? You know, I've read quotes where he says things like, "Oh, you know, Paul's doing kiddies music now. You know, he's appealing to the teeny boppers, or maybe even a younger audience." I think he felt that Paul was maybe trying to relive his youth again, or you know, trying to reheat his career in some way. Did you ever get that sense that George was looking at Paul, thinking, "Oh, you know, there must be more to life than that"?
Well, I think they were like, you know, brothers who had a fight. And so, you know, they kind of did that. But I also think that at that point, they were still going through a lot of the illegal situations that were going on. And I don't know, I kind of lost my thought there for a second about what I was going to say. But I think George he just was so tired of all of it that he would have been dismissive of Paul at that point. I mean, it was like a family fight. Let's face it. That's what it was. So if my sister and I got in a fight, I would say something really bad about her. That would be normal. It's like, oh, you're trying to do that? No way. And that's the way I looked at it. They were just, you know, human beings mad at each other or not supporting during that time.
It would be nice to imagine that they actually sat down and listened to each other's albums and got some pleasure out of them, but maybe that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
I don't think it was. And you know, you've got to and we learn more as we go along that, you know, for George, it was so hard for him to get anything on a Beatle album. It was Ringo who felt that he wasn't wanted, but it was George who felt that he wasn't appreciated. And you know, so I think that it had to have taken a long time for George to finally be okay with Paul. I'll put it that way. I don't know. I know they were at the end, but I don't know how long that took.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you think he specifically held against Paul? Was it the fact that his songs were not dropping onto Beatles albums, or was it something bigger than that? Was Paul patronizing towards him?
Well, you know, your guess is as good as mine. But if you look at the Get Back film, you can see it's right there that
it is,
you know, it's kind of like, whatever you want me to play, Paul, just tell me what to play. And I think, you know, there's the Philip Norman book that just came out recently about George goes a lot into the Liverpool days. And I read stuff I hadn't really known before. And one of them is the reminder that George was so much younger than them and they knew each other as teenagers. So, you know, that I can kind of get where Paul always looked down at George, kind of like the kid.
Yeah.
I think in defense of Paul, though, I think there's some history has come to light more recently, maybe, that, I mean, John could be very dismissive of George and extremely impatient and not really wanting to record George's songs, whereas George, I think George always said, you know, Paul would finally agree to work on one of my songs, and then he would pour everything into it. He would work flat out to, you know, get the bass parts right and be really, really attentive to what George was trying to do. Whereas John really didn't seem to have much interest in what George did. That's a kind of slightly alternative reading of the situation. I don't know if you ever kind of saw that, you know, John maybe being more dismissive of what George was doing, and Paul actually being quite supportive in the end.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I can understand that, and I can see that. I mean, Paul is he's very diplomatic. He is a very diplomatic person, and he loves music, and so it fits with that. John, you know, he was not always the kindest person. He would say something. He was pretty direct. Let me say that. And I'm sure that he just plain out said, "This is a piece of crap," where Paul would go, "Okay, if it's that important, let's work on it." You know, but if you watch in the Get Back album, I mean, the Get Back video, I think also that conversation between John and Paul is very revealing when they talk about how they have been unfair to so many ways. And John was definitely probably the one who went there first in that conversation. At least that's the way I heard it. Mm-hmm. But I think that George and John had a pretty good relationship in that time that they were breaking up. That's what I saw.
And Chris, we haven't really discussed your relationship with John. How do you remember John Lennon as a person?
Well, I remembered when I first met John, he had just gotten with Yoko. And so he was pretty absorbed. And I went to, when I was seeing Pete Shotton, his friend, and we went to a play together. And I did spend time with them at that time, but I didn't know John. And he was in the office a lot. You know, his door was open. You could go in and talk to him. And so I knew him like that. But again, he was very involved with Yoko, and they were into their own thing at that point. When he was with May during the Lost Weekend, we were all in California, and I lived at that house with them on the beach. So I got to know him much better during that period of time. And, you know, he was the kind of guy. I went to their apartment in New York, May and John's apartment, where he saw the UFO. And he showed me where he saw the UFO. And then he showed me, and this was in the 80s, it was like around George's tour. And he showed me his cable TV, which had just come out. And he was so excited that he could watch so many programs on the same TVs, just sit there and just keep changing the channel. And that was, you know, I thought in a way that was kind of a lot of him, but he also, you know, would be right in your face if he didn't say, if he saw something, he just said it. But I found him kind. He wasn't doing a lot of drugs during that period of time. So he was pretty smooth and stable during a lot of that time. And then after he went back with Yoko, I never really saw him again.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on May's marvelous movie, The Lost Weekend?
Well, I tell you, I was actually pleasantly surprised because, you know, this has been May's story a long time, and any of us who knew her have heard it a few times. And so to finally see her get noticed for that period of time was so important to her. And it turned out to be a really good documentary. It was well done. So I'm happy that she finally got her story out there, because personally, I would never have had the courage to spend my whole life going up against Yoko Ono.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what she's had to do. Every book she's written, everything she does, she's constantly having Yoko trying to overshadow it or something. At least that's May's story. If I talk to Yoko, I'm sure it'd be different, but I don't talk to Yoko, so, and I haven't. I only know May.
Brilliant.
Have you run out?
We're overwhelmed by you.
We can never run out. We can never run out.
There's just so many things and so many areas we can go in. Your life has been so varied, and the wonderful people that you've worked with is just astounding, I think.
Well, I am now at a time in my life when I can look back with nothing but gratitude. I'm amazed that I was able to do the things I did. I never planned them. You couldn't plan it. I just, you know, something would come up and I go, okay, okay. And it took me through all of the rock and roll years. And then I became an alcohol and drug therapist after that. Spent 20 years working in treatment centers with people with alcohol and drug problems and mental health problems. So it was a natural movement and transition. And so, you know, I got to see two different ways of life, and it was really interesting. I'm very grateful for it.
Amazing.
I guess it must make it a lot easier for you talking about substance abuse now after having that professional training over the last 30, 40 years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was sober for 24 years, and then I relapsed because my husband and I decided we were tired of being sober. And so we relapsed and traveled the world for about 6 years. And then I thought, oh, this isn't working. I thought I could do it, just be moderate, and I can't. I don't do that. So I got back into recovery again, and, you know, it's saved my life. I'm amazed that a lot of us even lived this long. So I'm very vocal, and I'm quite happy to talk about my addiction and what that was like and my recovery.
And how cathartic was writing the book?
How what?
How cathartic was writing your book?
Oh, it was so cathartic, I'll tell you. It was, first of all, there I was working in a treatment center in Tucson, Arizona. And I would say things about, I didn't talk very much about what I had done the previous 20 years because it just didn't fit. So I would, you know, and if I did, people didn't believe me. They thought I was just making it up. So until I started bringing people into treatment that were from that type, that lifestyle, or from that part of my life. And so my two lives didn't fit together. That rock and roll world didn't fit with the therapy world. And I felt very disjointed. It was like there was no connection. And I finally decided I've just got to, I mean, I knew I was going to write it, but I didn't want to write it too soon because, you know, I didn't know what the reverberation would be. But it was so, once it was done, I think Astrid Wyman, who was with Bill Wyman for a long time, asked me, what are you going to do if people are upset about it? And I said, you know, I've lived on other people's islands all these years. Now I'm going to live on my own island. And that was kind of where I went, whatever happens, it's my story and I can tell it. What really makes me happy is I found a co-writer, Catherine Ketchum, who is such an excellent writer that I'm very proud of the book we did together. I can reread it now and be okay with it because I think she didn't. I did a great job living it, but she did a really good job putting it all together. So it's something I'm proud of. And I have a documentary coming out sometime next year, probably at the beginning, that we did in London around Apple, a lot around different things, which I did with an English producer called Simon Weitzman. Have you guys ever met Simon? He's been there. He's been doing this stuff for a long time. Anyway, so I know we're going to have it ready in February for the Beatle Fest. This big Beatle Fest they're doing at TWA Terminal at JFK Airport. And maybe the last one, I don't know. So it's where the Beatles came. It's being done, I think they start February 9th to 11th. And they're doing it right around the time the Beatles first came to America, when they first arrived there in that same terminal. So that's the whole point of it. So they're going to show my video. It's got to be done by then. So we'll see the documentary then. It'll be called Miss Odell and it will be streaming.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
I was literally about to say that there's got to be a movie here, you know, with a really powerful female role model from the music industry. There's got to be a film. And I'm glad you've just confirmed that that is the case.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's really hard to think back to that time. There weren't that many women.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was kind of breaking a glass ceiling. But the interesting thing is it's not even being noticed till now. Now May's got her documentary and, you know, I've got mine coming out. And even some of the singers, female singers at that time, they've kind of been overlooked in a way, and things are coming out. Linda Ronstadt had her documentary, but there are others in the works for other women. So it's kind of good.
What was it like revisiting your old haunts in London? Did it rekindle some memories that maybe were left out of the book?
My God, I tell you, actually, first of all, I didn't recognize London. I had not been back in like 15 years. And it was like, what is this city? There are cranes everywhere. It's gotten really tall. When we went to Wigmore Street, 95 Wigmore Street was maybe the place where I had the most memories because that's when I joined. And though we weren't there that long, it was one floor and we were all on one floor. So it was a much tighter group of people at that point than when we moved to Savile Row and we had 5 stories. So I really liked that. And I got to see people I hadn't seen, Pattie Boyd for one. And, you know, went around and looked at some of the different places. It was really interesting. I enjoyed it. And of course, Whispering Bob Harris and I talked about a lot of other things too.
And will we see a revised and expanded edition of your book or even a second volume?
I don't know. We're sort of waiting. I talked to my co-writer about updating it, but I'm kind of waiting for it's with Simon and Schuster. And truth of the matter is that right now it's on print on demand, but as long as Amazon has it, it's not out of print. So we're hoping that there'll be enough requests for it that we can update it and put it out again.
Let's hope so.
It must be a vast challenge when you're looking back over your life and trying to write a book. I mean, with a life of the kind that you've led. I mean, how do you begin to kind of sift through it all and go, right, well, let's have that, let's not have that? I mean, it must be an absolute kaleidoscope of
it was. We had
endless memories.
Well, first of all, my memories, especially up until I put it on paper, because once you put it on paper, you don't have to remember it anymore. But my memories were actually like little shorts, films. Like I can't remember everything around it, but I've got these very clear short films in my head. So I wrote it like that, with these different things like the James Taylor story in the hotel. When I first met him, that was very vivid to me, but I can't tell you the name of the hotel, so I wrote that way, and we decided we were going to do short chapters because everybody our age is getting too old to stay up late. They could only do short chapters, but it worked perfectly when she was putting it together, that they were like little, scenario, like little films in a way. But editing was very difficult. There's a lot that's not in there. And I have tried to find our beginning of all the stuff we did. I can't find it because I can't remember a lot of the stories that were in there. So yeah, it went from something like 600 pages to 300 and something.
Did you have to try and track people down in order to ask them, did that really happen, or was that true, or did I make that up, or was it just from your own head?
I did one time. I remember doing that, and that's when there was a scene that took place. See, it's a movie at Friar Park, and it was Richard DeLello, Patty, and I. The three of us were there one evening. George was recording, and we were talking about something, and Richard was going up to his bedroom, which was up the galley and down a hallway. And this is I'm telling you my memory. And Richard suddenly you hear Richard go, "Hey man, what are you doing in here?" And some guy was crawling in the window of the second floor. And so then, the guy left and we called the police and everything. Okay, so when I was writing about that, I talked to Patty and I talked to Richard both and said, "You remember that?" Patty's was that she went upstairs and saw the guy coming in, but Richard and I were downstairs. Richard's was that he went up and saw the guy coming in, but I wasn't there. And I thought, oh my God, this is not bode well. So at that point, I thought, I'm not even going to bother. It's my memory. I'll keep it. I know I was right.
Yeah, I think that story, I've got a feeling is in Graham Thompson's George biography, but I can't remember who his source is for it. I think it's probably Patty.
Well, then it's wrong.
Right. Oh, well, that's good to know.
It came in through the bathroom window, obviously.
Close.
And you're still in touch with Patty?
Yes, indeed we are. We saw each other when I was over there in January, and we speak maybe once a month or something like that. Keep in touch on things. Yeah. So she is the one that I have continuously over the years kept in touch with.
Yeah.
Great. I went to London a few years ago, Chris, and I went to Savile Row, and at that time it was a children's clothes shop, Abercrombie. So I walked in pretending I was interested in children's clothes because I've got two kids, and I worked out which was Derek Taylor's office and trying to work out which was George's office. And then I even got in the lift with my kids and we tried to get to the roof, but we were foiled.
Yes, apparently when we went there in January, they wouldn't let us in the building because their lease was coming up. So we think that they were redoing some things they may have changed around and putting it back. So we never got inside, but a lot of workers kept coming in through the basement doors, through the studio door. It was really interesting. But apparently I was told that the reason they won't let anyone on the roof is because which Gallagher, Noel Gallagher, someone went up there on the roof and spit down over the side onto the sidewalk. That's the rumor. And so they said no more people on the roof.
That would be Liam.
Yeah, it would be Liam. Yeah.
Okay, Liam. Okay, that would make sense. I knew it was one of them.
Another thing to blame Liam Gallagher for. Yeah.
Well, why not?
And you can walk down the steps, you know, to the basement, where John and Yoko walked down in the movie, and it's a private apartment now. And we very nearly rang the doorbell, but we got scared.
That's interesting. I would have loved to have gone in. I was sad that we couldn't have a look around.
Yeah.
And at Wigmore Street, which is now like a business building and a bank or something, they actually came out and told us to quit filming in front of the building. And we said to the guy, do you know that the Beatles used to have their offices here? And he went, no, but you have to quit filming. So we just moved away a little bit and still kept filming.
Go back to the basement at Savile Row in the studio. Did you ever meet Magic Alex at all?
Yes, I went to his wedding.
Wow.
I had a Greek Orthodox wedding. I did meet Alex. Was around a lot in the beginning, but there was already the kind of divided. What am I trying to say? People were already divided on how real he really was with everything he said to do. So John believed him, but John believed in Klein too.
It must have become very quickly apparent when they started recording in Savile Row that his credentials were not up to
it became very apparent, very apparent. I mean, he was down in that basement for a long time when we moved in, but never saw him, you know, unless you went downstairs.
And were any of the Apple people or the Beatles at Magic Alex's wedding?
It wasn't an overall invitation. I can't even remember who I went with. I went with somebody else that I don't remember how we ended up how I ended up there, but I did.
And did the sound system work?
Not when he did it. I think his 16 tracks meant 16 speakers on the wall.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I was going to say, there weren't any little loudspeakers built into the wedding dress or anything like that, or in the cake, maybe.
Oh, his wedding was good. His wedding was very nice. It was very festive and big, and
super.
But not his studio.
And did you have any encounters with George Martin at all?
Of course. Yeah, of course. He was such a sweet man. Actually, Derek asked me to do interviews for a radio station in LA after I'd been there after we were in Savile Row. He said, I want you to go do these interviews and interview all these people, and so that they can play it on whatever station it was in LA. And I said, but Derek, I don't know these people and I've never done an interview in my life. And he said, you can do it. So I interviewed George Martin, but before him, Dave Clark. I did Dave Clark and Dwayne Eddy. I can't even remember, but I went over to George Martin, and at that time, all I could use was a reel-to-reel. So I had to carry this reel-to-reel with me. I didn't know how to work it. And so when I got to George and I couldn't get it working, so he fixed it for me so I could interview him. The interviews were so bad. They still paid me like $100 or something, but I don't think they ever could use them. The sound quality was terrible, but Derek was just trying to help me out. That is my failure.
I'm going to guess what your favorite Bob Dylan album is. I'm going to say Desire. Would I be right?
Well, it would be the one I'm most familiar with for sure. Yeah. So it would have the most memories for me, without a doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned One More Cup of Coffee and Sarah, which are obviously off that album.
Well, that tour was very much around that album. A lot of that album played. So yeah, I love some of the songs on that. Absolutely. And I wasn't a Dylan fan.
But you became one.
Oh.
Yeah.
I became a Dylan fan, not necessarily his music, but for him. I still bought his album.
Did you hear the story of Scarlett Riviera was literally walking around the village with her violin case, and Bob was driving past and said, "Can you play that thing?"
Yeah, I did. I read that. That was in, what book was that in?
Well, Scarlett mentioned it herself in a magazine I was reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an amazing woman too.
Yeah. Incredible. What an amazing find. And as you say, One More Cup of Coffee was amazing. And Isis, the performance of Isis and Hurricane were just incredible, out of this world.
I think that was the third one that I loved. Those were the ones that I would go out for. Sarah, One Cup of Coffee, and Isis.
And how much did the arrangements of those songs change from the start to the end of the tour?
Well, Bobby Newirth was the music director, so to speak. So I'm sure between Bobby and Bob, they would do that. It didn't change that much over the period of time. What changed was different people came in, like Joni Mitchell, and people that were, they'd have to then find a spot for them in the show. But it didn't change that much. What changed were just the shenanigans that Bob would get up to, like the white face. Suddenly he's in white face. It's like, but Bob, nobody can see you. But he didn't care.
And can I say, was he a ladies' man on that tour?
Well, not really. I mean, Sarah was there for quite a bit of it, because they were doing the Ronaldo and Clara. So Sarah was there. His mother was there. I don't remember that necessarily being, not that I knew of, let me put it that way, but he had Sarah around a lot.
Yeah. So he's trying to make his marriage work.
Well, I guess
Byers was there as well, I think. Joan.
Yeah. Who was?
Joan Byers.
Joan was there, yeah. And there were other women that he knew that I didn't know. Sally Kirkland, who's an actress, I didn't know her until I went on that tour. And Lola Cohen, who's an actress and involved with the Strasberg Institute. I didn't know her. And these may have been girlfriends of his, for all I know. I don't know. I was busy.
It's funny, Chris, on the Budokan album I was listening to today, when he's introducing the band, and it comes to Helena Springs, he introduces her as his fiance, and then the next backing singer, he introduces his ex-wife, and I'm thinking, oh, he's just having a laugh. He can't be serious.
Who is this, Bob?
Bob, yeah, in '78, Budokan.
Well, God, I can't even remember. Was he still with Sarah then? I can't remember.
No, he wouldn't have been. No.
Yeah. Well, he would just do that. He would just do that.
I mean, I know he got together with Carolyn Dennis a bit later, which was one of his other back singers. But Helena Springs, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, maybe he was just having a laugh.
More than likely, he was having a laugh. One way or another, somewhere in there, I would think so, probably.
Which is quite rare for Bob, because in most Bob concerts I've been to, he hardly says a word to the audience. And in this one, like he was talking all over the place, saying it's such a sweet audience.
That's unusual. Must be age.
or the Japanese are so polite, and I don't know.
They didn't understand him or something weird like that. I sat in on the second Rolling Thunder tour. He said, "You want a cup of coffee?" So we went. "Do you want a cup of coffee?" So we went up to the restaurant in the hotel, and he was sitting facing the door, and I had my back to the door, and we must have sat there for a good 45 minutes just talking about I don't know what. And when we finished, I turned around, and almost half of the tour was sitting there, but he never once looked away from me to let me know that somebody had just walked in. And I thought, okay, now that's amazing control, because it's very hard to do. You see someone you know, you just look up. He never did the whole time. I couldn't believe that half the tour was behind us and he hadn't said hello to anyone or even, acknowledged that they were there.
Nice.
Yeah, that's amazing, I think.
Yeah.
Can I just take you back to Leon Russell's debut album and the track Pisces Apple Lady? How did you feel when that song was played to you for the first time?
Well, I went to say goodbye and said hello.
Yeah, it was popular with you.
It was very, well, I had no idea he felt that way. I had gone out with him, but then I thought, I don't want to get involved with an American, and especially an Okie, because I had lived in Oklahoma. I had my own memories of that. And so I went out with him a couple times, and then he asked me to come to Eric Clapton's with him. And I just thought, I don't want to do this. And so after about a week or so, I thought, I feel kind of bad that I've been so rude to him, because we were asking him to play on one of Jackie Lomax's sessions and it got canceled, but George might want him again. So I called up and found out from Denny Cordell that he was just coming back from Eric's. I'm glad I didn't go with him. He was there like days. And so then I talked to him and he said, well, I'm leaving on the weekend, but I'm going to be in the studio at Olympic Studio tonight if you want to drop by. So I thought, I'm going to leave on a good note. So I went over, and I was actually there to say goodbye. And then I started listening to the track they were working on, and I heard some of the words like Pisces Apple. And I went, oh, that sounds close. And then I think Glenn Johns looked at Denny and said, what's it called? Piece of Apple Lady? And Denny said, no, it's Pisces Apple Lady. And went, oh no. Because then I could be anymore. So when he came out of the studio into the control room, he said, what'd you think of your song? And I said, I don't think you want to leave, do you? Not right away. So he stayed. And then I went back to the States.
And George and Ringo were both on that debut album as well with Leon.
Yes, and some of the Stones.
Were you present at any of those sessions at Olympic?
Was I? I was at this, well, then at that time he played Pisces Apple Lady. Eric was there, and he was using some of Chris Stainton and some of Joe Cocker's musicians. Can't remember exactly. I know Chris Stainton was there, who played for Joe. But after we got together, he went back and re-recorded it. And I said, why are you leaving? And he said, well, because I can't find the right drummer. Now, he'd already had Charlie Watts. And I said, so who would be the right drummer? And he said, well, somebody like Ringo. And I said, okay. So I thought, well, if I'm going to get him to stay, I'm going to have to find him Ringo. So I asked, George came up and he said, and I said, oh, Leon's going back. And he said, oh, why? And I said, well, he needs a drummer. And he said, oh, can he get one? And I said, well, he'd really like to use Ringo. And George said, well, I'll talk to Ringo, but not unless I can also play. So I put them on the phone to each other, and they did Pisces Apple Lady then after that with Ringo and George. And John was there with Yoko, but I said, do you want to be on the session? And he went, no, he didn't ask me. And then later I said, Leon, John would have joined. And he said, oh, darn. Musicians do not always communicate well.
Amazing.
With each other.
What year was this? What year are we talking about?
1970, yeah.
1969, end of 69, I think. It was the very end of 69. Yeah.
Chris, I'm very conscious we've been on for quite a while now. So is there any closing questions from anyone?
Has anyone got lunch?
It's dinner over here.
Supper time over here, yeah.
No, I've totally enjoyed this, and I really have. I watched you guys all together with Nancy, so I already knew about you. And May, of course, told me. I checked with May, Nancy says, well, check with May. She knows they're okay. And I said, okay. I don't think I need to do that, but okay. So anyway, it has been a real pleasure. It really has. Thank you. You guys,
thank you, Chris. It's
equally
been
a huge pleasure.
so enjoyable.
Sorry?
And your dog was very well behaved as well. The dog didn't bark once during our session.
Did not bark once. Something must be wrong.
You've been very kind and most gracious with all your time. And good luck with your documentary. We can't wait to watch it sometime after February.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know when we're getting it out. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.